Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This week we are wrapping up a three-part series about the Enneagram personality system. We have world-class Enneagram experts with us, Dr. Beatrice Chestnut Uranio Paes. And they, in the last two episodes, walked us through two of the centers of intelligence, the body center of intelligence, 8, 9s, and 1s. We talked about some of the obstacles that those personality types in the Enneagram system face. Then last episode, we talked about the heart center of intelligence, which are 2s, 3s, and 4s. And this week, we're going to wrap up with my center of intelligence, which is the head triad or center. These are 5s, 6s, and 7s in the Enneagram. So we're excited to do this. And welcome back, both Beatrice and Uranio. We're glad to have you back on the show this week.
It's always good to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Joel and Antonia.
So in case this is the first episode our listener is joining us can we get just a quick definition of the Enneagram and what a center of intelligence is?
Yes, the Enneagram is a 9-pointed star inscribed in a circle, and the diagram or the symbol itself has a lot of meaning. It derives from ancient wisdom traditions that have something important to say about human transformation. But in the way we'll be talking about it here, it's the framework for an interconnected system of 9 personality types. And when you find your type, when you locate which type describes your personality, it gives you a lot of insight into your patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving, and especially unconscious blind spots and patterns you may not be aware of that actually keep you stuck in self-limiting patterns that you don't always realize you're stuck in because you've been doing them so long as ways of adapting and functioning in the world and staying safe that you don't really realize that you're actually looking at 360 degrees of reality through a narrow slice. So it can be used as a growth tool to learn about your personality so that you can grow beyond it. Now, the centers of intelligence refers to the idea that is based in the Enneagram system that we humans, when we're living a human life, we have 3 centers of intelligence or 3 ways of processing information from the outside world. We have a head center that thinks and analyzes. We have a heart center that's based more in emotion and relating to others through emotion and empathy. And we have a body center that is the center of gut knowing or instinctive intelligence, moving into action or not moving into action, a kind of kinesthetic intelligence that's based in sensory experience that comes through the 5 senses.
And this week we're going to talk about the third and final center of intelligence, which is probably more traditionally connected to intelligence in general, which is the head center. And last week when we talked about the heart center, that was my own and Beatrice's center of intelligence. And this week we're going to talk about yours, Joel, and yours, Uranio, your center of intelligence. So when we've been patterning, or I'm patterning, that each one has a sort of a core emotion that it's dealing with. And so for the body center of intelligence, it was anger. For the heart center of intelligence, it was sadness. What is it for the head center?
Well, first, I want to remind people that when we're talking about a head type, we're talking about someone who overuses that center. So we all have all 3 centers. They're interconnected. We need all 3 to get along in the world. But when we're in personality and by definition out of balance in some ways, we each overuse one center and underuse the other 2. So head types are types that live more from their head center, that sort of relate to the world through the head, mostly, and less in a lesser way through their body and their emotions. And the core emotion associated with the head types is fear. And so I'll let Uranio describe a little bit more about that core emotion since he's a head type himself.
So fear for head types is not any particular kind of fear, like fear of heights or fear of certain animals. It's not that. Fear is something more generic. And we could define the head type fear as a need to anticipate what's going to happen in the future, both near future or something really into the future. That anticipation has some kind of intolerance of uncertainty underneath. And that is something that we can call fear, because it's fear of living, fear of being, fear of just allowing for life to happen. It's like I fear what will happen if I don't stay in control of all those processes. And then I start overusing my head to develop a fake sensation that I am protected. Underneath all this theme, there is also a basic sense of not being protected and a need for safety and or security. For all head types, although each of them deal with this in different ways, like the fear itself for type 5 is a bit more the fear of feelings. For type 6 is fear of being and stepping into the authority position. And for 7s, it's more fear of suffering. But what is common for all of them is that they overuse the head and find refuge in the head when something emotional or instinctive is happening that they don't know how to deal with.
So the pattern I'm seeing here is this is the more abstract of the 3 centers. Like it feels more like it's in the head. It's through narrative, metaphor, like fear is an abstract concept, whereas sadness and anger feel more visceral in the body. This is more detached from the body, would you say?
Yeah, I think you're right on to something important, Joel. And another feature of head types is disconnection. While all of us can disconnect, head types disconnect more often. But disconnect from what? From several things. They disconnect from emotions, and they do disconnect from the body, as you're talking about, but also they disconnect from other things. They also risk becoming too theoretical and not going too fast into action.
And because fear is the core emotion of the head types, and because it operates in the way that Uranio just described, it leads the head types to have a lot of focus, sometimes conscious, sometimes unconscious, on safety, certainty, but also safety. What's going to happen? It's a little bit like fear of the unknown and a sense that something could happen that could be threatening, that could give me an experience I don't want to have, possibly emotionally or otherwise. And so there's a sense of needing to mentally manage what's happening to stay safe.
I heard, and I just want to make sure I took my notes right, that for 5s, it's a fear of feelings. For 6s, it's a fear of being. And for 7s, it's a fear of suffering.
Correct.
Yes.
So what's the paradox? You know, we talked about the body center of intelligence being you called it the triad of self-forgetting. So even though they're really in touch with their body, there's a part of them that actually ends up being not connected to their body, or at least ignoring it. For the heart types, it was having such a focus on emotions and relationships that they end up being kind of disconnected from emotions sometimes, or like not prioritizing them because they're so focused on image. What ends up being the paradox of the head center of intelligence?
As for all personality types and all 3 triads that we also talked about on previous podcast episodes here, we set ourselves up for the thing that we fear the most and that we really don't like, as in a self-fulfilling prophecy of some kind. And what head types do in this sense is to try to think things through all the time in search for security. But the more they think, the more insecure they feel, because it's endless, and the world we live in does not offer this kind of certainty. So this is one big paradox. And also, if you think, Antonia, that the goal to think more about everything before doing is to find the best way to go, a more effective way, then it doesn't really happen this way, because when a head type stops thinking, there is a tendency to not go implement that only. It's a tendency to keep thinking. In an example, like type 7, one of the head types, when they do brainstorming, and they are brilliant in this, they come up with several ideas, and then everybody gets engaged with one idea and they say yes, but the next day at times they come up with another kind of brainstorming. So it's actually an attachment to thinking.
Yes, and there can be a way that head types falsely believe and don't realize this false belief is happening, that they can control reality by thinking about it. So I can manage what's going to happen. Sixes think a lot about what might happen, worst case scenarios. And it's almost as if if I can think about something happening that I don't want to happen, I will prevent it from happening. So it's a little bit like seeing the intellect as omnipotent, or overvaluing the thinking function as a way or a means to control what's happening. Now, sometimes this can play out in the realm of relationships, where they can have a hard time with other people's feelings or other people's perspectives. Often in relationships, they can reduce things to a kind of problem-solving mentality, which again, it's because it's their big strength, that they're really good at analyzing and thinking about things in terms of concepts. If they can see something as a problem and mentally generate alternative solutions, that they can control what's happening, and not realize that feelings, for instance, emotions aren't necessarily something that you can control through thinking. And one of the things that head types can do, which can be an obstacle, is they cannot be very much in touch with their emotions sometimes and not realize it, because what they can do is they can think about feelings instead of actually feeling them. So they may have the impression that they feel sad, but feeling sad may be threatening, again, because it's not the comfort zone. It can seem more like opening up to something uncontrollable or unmanageable or unknown. And so they can mistakenly think they're feeling their feelings, but really they're maybe just thinking about what they imagine sadness is like, or think about being sad, and not realize that they're still in their mental zone, and they're still in the head.
Man, that resonates with me as a head type. I'm an Enneagram 6, and the idea of intellectualizing grief, as an example, like it's very rare when I feel the real emotion of grief. I'm always abstracting and imagining what grief must be like. It's more of an intellectual experience of grief. And I've learned that my work is going to be to try to feel these emotions directly rather than intellectualize them. And then the other thing you mentioned about the problem solving, I've noticed, again, this is personal and anecdotal to me, but it sounds like it might be a broader pattern, is when I don't have a problem to solve, will there be dragons, because I'm like, well, something's got to be wrong, and I might end up creating a problem unconsciously just to solve it going forward, which is probably not always the healthiest thing to do either.
Joel, I'm also a head type. And while I do resonate with most of what you're saying, because I'm a 5, not a 6, it's not necessarily thinking of new problems for me, but it is a lot about coming up with any other thing that in practice is a mental distraction, so that I don't feel much, or that I don't necessarily come to my body and my instincts and just do and move forward. So as we're talking about this, I want to point out one obstacle that is really common for head types, and that is a slow decision-making process and a pace in doing that one thing that is not the fastest. Head types get stuck in thinking of too many scenarios, too many possibilities and what ifs. So this slows them down.
One thing that can come up as an obstacle for head types in relationships is a sense of uncertainty around emotions, and especially other people's emotions. Because as we said earlier, head types are unconsciously motivated to reduce uncertainty. And there's a kind of intolerance of uncertainty or discomfort with uncertainty. Guess what? Other people's emotions can feel uncertain because they can seem unpredictable or uncontrollable or causing problems. It's sort of like in a different language than head types are used to speaking. It can be hard sometimes creating understanding of emotions because emotions can seem illogical or irrational to a head type. And certainly they are. That's by definition what they are. It can be hard for them to kind of meet in the middle because it's, one person can be operating at the head level, the other person is on the emotional level, and it can be hard to sometimes find a bridge between the two. And so an emotional person in relationship with a head type can feel like, I'm in some ways being devalued as irrational because I'm not operating on the mental level. And so sometimes that can create obstacles, especially in relationships.
I agree completely with you, B. I just want to add that I think the problem is even deeper, which is head types do not dedicate energy and time throughout life to exploring emotions. And this makes them not know what emotion they're feeling at the moment. And they find it difficult to name it. And when they start trying to do that, they do it from a purely cognitive way. It's like reading a book about emotions, which is not the same thing, as we know.
And they can also be detached from their body in a significant way. Uranio often says something funny about fives, that the body is just kind of something to hold up the head. And so just like they can be not always comfortable with operating at the emotional level or avoid exploring their emotions and connecting with their own emotions, they can have a hard time remembering what they need to do to become more balanced in connecting with their own body. And so sometimes physical activity or somatic approaches to growth can be very important for them.
I'm thinking back to some of the conversations Joel and I have had. And by the way, it's really interesting to hear all of this. Myself as a thinker in the Myers-Briggs system, but being in the heart center, and Joel as a feeler in the Myers-Briggs system, but being in the thinking or the head center. It's so interesting because in the last episode, I don't know if we use the phrase read the room, but I just know as a thinking type in the heart center, I don't always know to read the room before I say something, but the second I've said something that is unacceptable, I instantaneously know I've done it, right? And I'm like, oh crap, now I've got to go fix all of this. As opposed to resting into my instinct to go, well, no, I have a right to feel that way. I don't have to immediately make sure everybody else is comfortable with this objectionable thing I just said. And kind of a similar parallel dynamic with Joel being a feeler, but in the head center, is I've noticed that Joel, even tiny little things that are problems, he wants to solve them. And he says this phrase all the time: how do we make sure we never experience this ever again? And I always go,
it's so true.
I'm like, I don't think you can. I don't think that's a possibility. I don't think you can make sure that everything that every problem you've ever had can be like now, just solved and you'll never experience it again. But just like my inability in the heart center to rest in on, I have a right to have an opinion that the rest of the room finds objectionable. A similar dynamic, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you can't solve all the problems or never experience this again, but you can have trust in your ability to solve it next time. So what I'm kind of picking up as a possibility here is that people in the head center sometimes don't have self-trust. Like, trust your ability to just handle this as it comes up next time. And that would be maybe a way of pulling in on that instinctive body intelligence. Am I circling a drain here, or am I getting close to accurate?
I think it's very well said, actually, and I'm sorry, Joel, that she got you. And
how do I prevent her never saying this again on an episode?
I'm sending you my head type sympathy right now. What I think, Antonia, is that it's not natural at all for head types to keep empathy and also to tolerate the uncertainty, as we said before, and therefore all you said. What happens is that we allow a very, very big role in our lives for gathering information and learning all the time. And that might make us super smart and capable of linking different things together and having a very complex thinking pattern and coming up with lots of good insights. But at the same time, there is analysis paralysis. There is a hard time to go on because we just don't, deep inside, we don't feel very self-confident, and we have a lot of self-doubt, as you very well said.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show.
I see that tendency towards disconnection. It's interesting seeing Joel as a feeler, but also in the head center, because I can see, instead of just intellectualizing emotions, what I actually see you doing, particularly as somebody who uses introverted feeling as a cognitive function in the Myers-Briggs system, is performing emotions. Not always being connected to emotions, but then at the same time also having a lot of space for certain emotions like anxiety. Like Joel can just feel anxiety for days. And I just, oh man, I cannot handle the emotion of anxiety. Like the second I see it coming, I'm just like, I got to bounce. I don't care if the entire world collapses around me. I will not feel anxious about it. And so it's interesting to see these relationships, almost like a paradoxical relationship with all these things. And so we mentioned in the other episodes which of the specific types within the centers, like the kind of relationship they have with these core emotions and these challenges. So in the head center, how do each of the individual types respond to all the things that we're talking about here, this fear and the desire for certainty when they feel so uncertain? What's the different types' relationship with that dynamic?
Yes, the core emotion is fear. And remember, the core emotion is something that gives shape to some of the core patterns of the personality type. And again, it's not that these people go around feeling fear in an active, conscious way. It's often unconscious, but it's motivating. It's a central factor in why they do what they do and how their patterns and their habits are set up. So in terms of the three head types, 6s overdo fear. They're motivated by it a lot. It's like one of the key factors in why they do the things they do. Even when they're not conscious of it, it's often underlying. You mentioned, Antonia, that Joel often feels anxious. Anxiety is kind of always there in the background. And anxiety is related to fear. It's a variation on fear. And then 7s underdo fear. 7s usually report not being fearful. They say, I'm not afraid. Now they do tend to realize when they've done a little bit of work on themselves that they are afraid of getting stuck in an uncomfortable emotion. They have this underlying belief that if they allow themselves to feel pain, and pain can include sadness, hurt, boredom, discomfort, fear, all of these feelings, if they allow themselves to feel a feeling in a significant way, they fear that it will never end. And so that's what Uranio referred to earlier as a fear of suffering. So 7s tend to not be in touch with it. And that's one of the primary functions of their personality. They focus on what's positive and pleasurable as a way of avoiding any feeling that might be uncomfortable, which they tend to fear, but they don't really feel it very consciously all the time. And then 5s are kind of in the middle. 5s, I once heard Uranio say, 5s get good at avoiding situations in which they might feel fearful. So 5s tend to be more out of touch or automatically disconnect from their feelings a lot. But when they do get in touch with feelings, they realize that they're fearing a lot of things. It's just not very conscious. And it comes up for them at times, but they can avoid feeling it by the ways they operate in the world in terms of controlling life in the way that it happens to them mentally. And which means oftentimes fives aren't very spontaneous. They don't leave a lot of room for being surprised because they're controlling things so they don't have to get in touch with their feelings. And of course, that reflects a fear of feeling.
I can see why self-observation is so crucial in this entire system. I want to reflect back something that was a little bit of a meta statement on the model itself. Each of these, these core emotions and a lot of the behaviors that come around them, they're diagnosing unconscious focus, but not the response to that focus. And so what's difficult is sometimes a response to an unconscious focus is to pretend you're not focusing on it at all. Like you're pushing it away and not wanting to look at it. But the unconscious is still focused on it. It's kind of like Joel and I talk about how when you're being rebellious, you're still in control of the thing you're rebelling against, right? Like whether you're following it to the T or rebelling against it, it's still the fiddle you're dancing to.
It's controlling you still, even if you're going counter to it. Yes,
exactly. Like you're still taking your cues from it. And so the only way to know that you're not in control of something is to legitimately just not be taking your cues. Like sometimes you're going to, follow it and sometimes you're not going to follow it and it doesn't really matter. And that's when you know you're not in control or being controlled by that thing anymore. And so what I'm hearing is that these core emotions, the way that you know that you're dancing to the fiddle of one of those core emotions is your behavior is either to follow it religiously or to rebel against it. But you're doing this unconsciously. So, man, that self-observation really is key to see which of these core emotions is the fiddle that I'm dancing to.
The way I would put it is the Enneagram helps us notice with more consciousness what we tend to focus our attention on, our conscious focus, but we can't focus on everything at once. So that focus defines what we don't focus on or what's in our blind spot or a shadow. And sometimes what we don't focus on and what isn't on our radar screen is something very important that is driving our behavior nonetheless, even though we're not aware of it. But yes, all of this points to the key importance of self-observation and of making unconscious tendencies more conscious.
Beatrice, would you be willing to just, like we've done in the last few episodes, summarize the obstacles and this center of intelligence for us?
Yes, I'll give you a summary of some of the main challenges and obstacles. And Uranio, if I leave anything out, please add in here. I would say the first set of obstacles comes from the fact that the head types focus on mental activity a lot. It's as if they try to do all of life through thinking and analyzing. So they can get stuck in analysis and paralysis. They can get caught up in envisioning multiple scenarios, thinking of different solutions to problems, and not go into decision-making mode, not take action quickly enough. Now, their core emotion of fear also creates a set of obstacles for them, in part because it keeps them focused, and again, whether unconsciously or consciously, imagining that bad things are going to happen or that problems are bigger than they are. It can lead them to avoid interactions in life, relationships, different kinds of experiences, sometimes without realizing it. The focus on fear and safety leads them to think a lot in terms of anticipating what's going to happen, predicting what's going to happen. And because they learn to rely on that mental mode, sometimes they can have the mistaken idea that they can control what's going to happen. And so get too much into intellectualizing things and thinking that intellect can do everything. Of course, another set of obstacles comes with the fact that being so focused on the mental level means they're not as focused on the emotional level and the body level. And so they can devalue emotions, their own and those of others. They can think they're feeling when they're really just thinking about feeling. They can kind of get stuck in the mental mode and not realize that there are those other two modes that have to do with being in the body, sensing your gut feelings, sensing what feels right to you in the body, or tapping into the wisdom and information that emotions can bring, that healthy emotions bring. And so they can get focused too much on reacting from fear to try to, control what's happening through the mental activity without realizing that they're being driven by fear. They can think that they're just solving problems or trying to predict what's going to happen next to be able to be proactive about what their plan is, but not really realize that they're not taking into account these other levels of experience. Now, one last thing I want to say that I think can actually be an obstacle for head types is that Western culture tends to privilege the head. The education system teaches to the head. We talk in terms of things that make sense, understanding. We can sometimes, all of us, think more in terms of the head center being the only center of intelligence. And I actually think on the one hand, that makes life a little bit easier for head types. But on the other hand, I think it sometimes makes it harder for them to grow and realize that the head center isn't the only or main way of seeing the world.
Fantastic.
The whole time I'm sympathizing, right? The whole point of understanding these systems, well, not the whole point, but one of the nice emergence is that you have more sympathy and empathy for other ways of being. But as you're talking about the body center, I'm just like, why would anybody do any of that? And the same thing with the head. I'm just like, why would anybody do any of that? But when you were talking about the heart center and doing that beautiful summary, I legit started crying. So it's like, it's one of those things where you can really tell that when you get the diagnostic accurate for what center of intelligence that, is the thing that's occupying your unconscious mind, it should kind of strike you. It should be something that almost creates a visceral response, I would imagine.
Uranio, is there anything else that you have observed about obstacles that come up for the head center that you want to share?
Look, I think what Antonia just said is super important, and it's a very good insight. And in practice, what happens with all of us, regardless of type or dominant intelligence, is that we want our dominant intelligence to keep dominating us. We want it to be above the other two intelligences. And the way that head types do this is by just numbing out feelings and instincts and sometimes projecting guilt or blame. There is a blame game sometimes that head types do with other people who are emotional or who are instinctive. And, we use that mental ability to show all the ways that they are not doing something that they should do or going against us. But in practice, that we're in a trap of allowing our dominant intelligence to keep distorting all the scene and kidnapping energy from the other two intelligences. So if we look back, Joel, to all the obstacles we said, we will notice that all of them require using a little bit more of one or both of the other two intelligences, or intelligence of the heart and intelligence of the gut. If a head type doesn't do this, there is not much of a way out of that inner prison that all of us live in. And the Enneagram invites us to really be willing to develop what's not natural, what's not easy, what didn't come with us in our factory setting. So we need to just be aware of the fact that we are not better or than anyone else who's not a head type, for instance, and then dedicate a lot of energy and time and getting in things like therapy to be able to develop those underdeveloped areas of us. And only by doing so, we can reach that state of using all three centers of intelligence, which is good not only in practical ways in life, because if we use the right intelligence for the right thing, we will have better results, and also we will waste less energy. But it's also important from a psycho-spiritual perspective, because we will then be present with all of those things that make us human. And then we will be in a more fulfilling state and can even work from that to go beyond into higher realms of awareness.
I'm glad that you mentioned the psycho-spiritual aspect. That was something that you mentioned in the very first episode. And we also referenced Carl Jung's concept of one-sidedness. And a big piece of understanding which center of intelligence you're in is recognizing what you're overvaluing, and then understanding that there's a one-sidedness to that, right? Even though this isn't Jung's system, it still applies. The same principles apply, which are the principles that apply to all psycho-spiritual tools, which is that we need to stretch, get out of our comfort zone, and be aware of that one-sidedness. So I appreciate you bringing that phrase back in, because that's effectively what we're attempting to do. We're trying to get a really good diagnostic here for what's going on with us and be able to observe where is our one-sidedness located, so that we can, when we're stretching and getting out of our comfort zone, we know that this isn't quote unquote wrong, even though it might feel off, right? When we stretch and get out of our comfort zone, there's always a sense of offness, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. The instinct is good to stretch and to get out of that comfort zone, particularly if you're going down a growth path to get to that place of development.
One of the resources I'd like to direct people to is the book you both have written together. And it's out now at all major book retailers. Would you just give us the title and a little bit more about this book for people that want to go further?
Yes, it's called The Enneagram Guide to Waking Up. And the subtitle is Find Your Path, Face Your Shadow, Discover Your True Self. And it's an introductory book, but instead of just describing the 9 types, it really sets out a 3-step growth path for each one of the 9 types. So you learn about your type as you're learning about exactly what your growth path is. First, identifying some of the patterns associated with your type that tend to be more conscious, that you can kind of see, oh yeah, I tend to do this all the time. Oh, there I go again. But then looking deeper at some of the more unconscious patterns that tend to be blind spots, or in what Jung called the shadow, and really working to make those more conscious. Sometimes that involves feeling some of the pain that you may have buried, that your personality defenses are set up to keep you from feeling. And then knowing what you can aspire to, knowing a little bit about the high side of what's waiting for you in a positive sense once you face your shadow and work through some of your less conscious patterns and develop more flexibility.
Give us your website where people can go to find out more about what you do, your podcast, your live events, your workshops, all your digital courses, your membership site. All those things live there. Where should they go?
They can go to cpenneagram.com, stands for Chestnut Paes. cpenneagram.com, and they can find all the information they might need there about our online self-guided courses on different topics related to the Enneagram, and also connect to our Enneagram 2.0 podcast.
Yeah, and their podcast is fantastic, by the way. I highly recommend it. That's Enneagram 2.0 if you're searching for that. Beatrice Uranio, thank you so much for joining us for this 3-part series. We truly appreciate you sharing all of your wisdom and all the nuance of information you have around each of these centers of intelligence. Thank you so much for being here.
Antonia and Joel, thank you for our partnership, for all the work you do on Personality Hacker, and for having us here on your podcast.
Yes, thank you so much. It's always a real joy to talk to you about our deep, deep common interest and dedication to what it takes to grow.
And if you've been listening along, now's your chance to make your voice heard. I didn't ask you in the last 2 episodes to come over and talk about your experience with the Enneagram because I wanted you to hear all 3 parts before you did. Come over and make a comment below any of these podcasts based on the center of intelligence that you believe you are. Let us know your questions, your comments, or maybe you could share your story of your Enneagram journey. If you're in the middle of one, let us know and the people in the community know about what it's like for you using this system.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review for us on iTunes, that helps us out a lot. And if you would like to invest in your own guided path for your Enneagram type, Come check us out at personalityhacker.com under our suite of programs. We have Enneagram starter kits now available for each of the 9 types. And of course, the subtypes are also woven into each of those experiences. So go check it out at personalityhacker.com.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.